Hi, thanks everybody. This is very interesting talks. I'm eager to talk to our two panelists. I'm Jeremy Kahn. I'm a technology reporter at Bloomberg News, and we'll just kick this off right away. Both of you talked a bit about data. Data is obviously top of mind right now. We've just had the sort of Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. I think people are starting to think very hard about who they want to share their data with. And banks traditionally, I mean, Ann talked a little bit about this, banks have not been the most trusted entities, particularly after the 2008 financial crisis. So I mean, what are you guys doing to let, assure customers that, yeah, I want to share my data with my bank? Ranil, how do you deal with this? I mean, because traditionally, if you give people the choice, they might not want you guys to have all that data on them.
Sure, so I think the onus is on the bank to really demonstrate to customers that we're using their data for the benefit of the customers and not for the benefit of the bank. So the example I shared before around, can we use the data about you to make sure that when you're applying for a product, we don't have to ask you any questions, right? So if we can continue to demonstrate that the data is there for us to serve you, then I think banks will be able to rebuild trust. If, however, the data is used to sell you things you don't want, or to partner with other people who then also communicate with you, then I think absolutely banks will lose a lot of trust. So the approach HSBC has taken is very much in the former, right? So we want to be really clear that we're using data for the benefit of our customers, and that's it. That's all we want to use it for.
Ann, how do you do it?
Yeah, well, I think banks have the data. Bank data is the richest form of information about how you spend your life. There's a huge amount of data in banks, and that data is locked away and has traditionally been used against customers and not for customers. And what we are doing at Starling is allowing customers to use that data for their benefit, either within Starling or outside Starling. But imagine a situation where your incumbent bank, your traditional bank, can underwrite a loan because it knows more information about you than anybody else. But if you go to another loan provider, they don't have that information, and therefore they can't actually give you the best price. And therefore, that actually suppresses competition. What we believe in is that data should be owned by the consumer, should be managed by the consumer, and released to only those parties that consumer wants. And I think some of the new legislation about PSD2 changes that. But we are going into a world where people will appreciate that data about them is very, very valuable. And I own my data about me, and you should, and you should. It isn't for the bank to own it. It is for the individual and consumer to understand the value and benefit and have the mechanisms of sharing it in a very controlled way.
Right, absolutely. And you talked a little bit about, it's about relevance, not revenue. I mean, forgive me for being a little bit skeptical about that, but you guys are a bank. The traditional model has always been about cross-selling people stuff. Are you telling me that at the end of the day, you're not assessed on how much revenue, how much stuff you sell?
So fortunately, that's changing, right? So I think traditionally, absolutely, banks were about, particularly with the market, about cross-selling. Now, though, with the capabilities I talked about, we are using those, and it'll become more and more pervasive. We want to use those to actually help customers realize their goals and ambitions. So the world of the interactions you have are really nudges and kind of little tips for you to save more, be financially healthier. So the interactions really drive those, which don't really necessarily have an immediate revenue impact, but they have a benefit on the customer's financial health. So in the context of the world of the interactions being more about, we're interacting with you to drive your financial health and your well-being, absolutely, relevance becomes a much more critical, it becomes the critical metric.
Right. Do you believe him, Ann?
I think that as a bank, I was 30-odd years in that world. And, we always had targets for cross-selling and upselling. And occasionally, God forbid, we missold. And we weren't very good at it either. We always had targets to sell more products to customers, but the data was all over the place. We couldn't consolidate it. We didn't know what customers could benefit from, and we made mistakes. The only way to solve that problem for me was by quitting and starting again, and really making data the fundamental, sort of basis for everything we do. and taking different sources of data and using it together to figure out that when I'm driving in the car and I'm going to Gatwick, I'm probably going to go on my holiday. And, and my spending patterns are going to be different. And I'm going to be taking off on a flight, and when I get there, don't stop my card.
Right.
So we can use all these ways of and activities that we combine using mobile phone data and transactional data to make banking with Starling safer, more secure, and give people real benefits so they can have a better financial life.
Right. And I hate to put you on the spot. I put him on the spot. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Traditionally banks, they offered a current account product to sort of bring you in, and then again, they made money on cross-selling. If you're not cross-selling, how are you going to make money? I mean, I think it's a big question for a lot of the neobanks who all, like you guys, have started with a kind of free-to-market current account product, and then have started to try to build on or to partner with others. But where's the money? I mean, it's been a couple of years.
Very good question. We're a bank, unlike some of the other sort of neobanks that are not banks. So we have the benefit that we have deposit balances where we can lend out of overdrafts and other lending. We have interchange. We also have marketplace revenues whereby we can actually benefit if the customer rewards us for other products. We also have a B2B business, to be honest. We provide wholesale payments to large organizations like MasterCard and the government. So we have a wide range of revenue streams, and hopefully we are very, very efficient. And I used to do my job with 10,000 people. Now I have 190. We are very efficient, and hopefully we can pass that efficiency on to our customers.
Now, traditionally, particularly in the UK, no one ever, current accounts are very sticky. No one ever changed their current account bank. I don't think those figures have changed too much, but maybe you can share with us. I mean, are you winning customers over from traditional banks, or is it more that some of the millennials who haven't had a bank before are choosing the neobanks rather than going to a traditional?
When I started this exercise 4 years ago, my expectations were that people would find this a compelling proposition and would switch to us. Some people do. Some people, look at the research reports. For example, Optima last week named us the very best banking app in the UK. So people do come to us because we're a better traditional, competing bank. But a lot of people try us out because they find our features help them with their running their lives. And they try us out for a couple of months and then decide, well, this is working for me, I'll swap. We also have some very interesting demographics. We have the traditional 20s and 30s, 40s group of people, but then we have a huge number of people in their 50s and 60s who obviously have much more leisure, perhaps, and are looking for something where they can run their lives on a smartphone. Right. So it's more than just the traditional people in their 20s who are looking for a cool app.
Right. Ranil, what do you find? I mean, you're a traditional bank. You do have these legacy systems you have to integrate. On the other hand, you already have a pretty good customer base. You're not starting from scratch on that sense. How have you been able to sort of marry these two things? And are you finding that you were having people, before you started making some of these changes, defect to go to these neobanks?
So I think the reality is for traditional banks, there is quite a large amount of legacy tech that has held us back. And so I think, we've spent the last probably few years maybe in catch-up mode. But if I look at some of the capabilities that are being deployed globally, right? So in the UK, we have the Connected Money app. In China, there's a whole range of banking capabilities integrated into the WeChat platform. It feels like we are really starting to catch up and also to focus much more heavily on the customer experience. But you're absolutely right. We already have lots of customers. We have a really strong balance sheet. It's for the traditional banks to lose, really. So I think we put a lot of focus on really trying to re-engineer the customer experience, to make to really change the way that we interact with customers and really change that dynamic.
Right. And is it working?
It's starting to work. I feel it is, right? So I feel it is. I feel it's starting to work. I mean, we've seen, in many of our markets. I think our app was, our banking app was #1 in the App Store in a whole range of markets recently, right? So we're starting to actually get that sort of feedback.
Right. This is an AI conference, and one of the hot topics in AI sort of discussions right now is around fairness and transparency. Both of you talked a lot about how you're trying to use machine learning to improve the customer experience. But I think there's a question customers have about, well, an algorithm's making decisions on whether I need a physical for my term life insurance or not. How do I know if that algorithm's making the right decision? And is it recommending, that only people of a certain race or a certain, go for a physical? How do you kind of deal with these issues within HSBC and within Starling?
Yeah.
Ronald, Anne, you go.
Okay, I think that we're living in a very, very different world than where we were sort of 3 or 4 years ago. We are accountable to many more people. We're accountable to our community. We're accountable to a large customer base that actually questions us. And the level of transparency is awesome. And therefore we are constantly faced with these questions whereby people hold us to account. People actually ask us the questions about how we're making decisions on granting credit, how we do in making these fundamental decisions, and we have to explain, and we are prepared to explain.
Right. Ronald, how do you guys deal with it?
Sure. So on the, are we using, is there any opportunity for discrimination? So that's one where I'm pretty confident that there isn't. So we in terms of the feature engineering process that goes into building algorithms, we're incredibly conservative about the types of data that we expose to the algorithm. So anything that relates to things like your race, your ethnicity, or even things that could be proxies for those, like where you live, we remove, right? So it's very much all of the things that could actually discriminate are taken out. The second piece is we're not in the world of algorithms just running wild, right? So effectively, it is still very supervised, right? So, if anything, we're actually making better decisions now and being fairer because we're able to expose more data. Right? So think about the credit process from 5 or 10 years ago, where you fill out a set of standard questions. That was it. The decision was very black and white. Now we have so many more inputs and insights that we can actually use to make a much fairer decision. But look, definitely, it's an area that we really are very cautious about. So we have a lot of governance and oversight to make sure that the decisions that we make, we can explain them and that they don't arise to the issues that you raised.
Oh, that's great. It's good to hear that you're actually thinking about this stuff and then taking steps to
But massively,
make sure,
massively. So I think there's a huge focus on the moment about the ethics of machine learning and AI, making sure we've got a proper ethical framework in place, but also making sure there's lots of checks and balances to review when we actually use these types of approaches to make decisions.
Right. Now, you're a traditional bank, you offer a range of services, and you started out offering a current account product, you're spreading out into other products, you have other partners, but I think there's these two different sort of competing models. The idea that, you're going to need a bank, a sort of one-stop shop that's going to offer a range of your, serve all of your financial needs, whether it's sort of wealth, financial planning, checking, you need a mortgage, you can go to your bank. Or there's this other model where there's a lot of new providers out there, a lot of these sort of fintechs that aren't banks, that are just offering a particular niche product, and there's a sense that either the customer will pick and choose, or the bank will simply become this umbrella kind of gateway to these other providers. How do you sort of see banking evolving, and what model do you think will win out?
Yeah, I think banks have always wanted to be the centre of everybody's life and be able to control all the products. That's never happened. We were deluded. We weren't selling all the products. Majority of mortgages being sold by a big bank that are on their books for their own customers came in through brokers. So it's never really worked. I think they're going to have a combination. You're going to have people who, like ourselves, who will have a marketplace to consolidate products and show a dashboard of somebody's financial life. I think you could have the fragmentation of the value chain and some banks being subsumed into other people's apps and other people's customer front ends. And who knows? I think we're going to go towards an invisible banking world. Banking has not changed the last 300 years. We had branches. The branches became the contact center. The contact center became the web. The web became the app. That could change.
Yeah. Ronald, what do you think?
So look, I'm sort of conflicted, right? So on one end, look at markets like China, where platforms like WeChat have basically inserted themselves between the consumer and banks.
Right.
So as a customer in China, you would interact with WeChat hundreds of times a day, and you'd never even look at your bank app. You do that via WeChat, right? But that's in a context of there is a lot of security, and that's kind of all built into the WeChat platform. There's a lot of government drive behind making sure that that's stable. If I think about the rest of the world, maybe it's not as maybe there are more concerns around data security, cyber security. And if you think about it, your banking data is really the crown jewels of data that you own. Would you be comfortable to fragment that in a world where you're worried about people stealing your data and cyber fraud and cyber security? So my sense is, I think outside of markets like China, I think banks still will they will actually be able to own more of that relation on the basis that they're able to secure the data in a more in a more effective way than using a whole range of different I guess providers. That's kind of my view.
Interesting. You both spoke a little bit in your presentations about PSD2 and what that's going to mean. I've heard various views on this. A lot of traditional banks were not so happy about PSD2, but I also know that HSBC is seen as an opportunity. You have the connected banking app. You're trying to use it as a way to potentially bring in more customers and to actually become the hub for a lot of that your financial needs in a way that you weren't before. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the sort of like the double-edged sword that PSD2 is, and how does it?
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of talk about PSD2 allowing people to switch bank accounts more easily. I don't think that's the power. I think the power is allowing sort of connectivity to make payments from other useful sites. I think that PSD2, if it goes to logical conclusion, could threaten MasterCard and Visa, could disintermediate them with direct payment instructions. So if it happens, okay, there's a huge amount of, this is happening in the UK rather than the States, and therefore an awful lot of people are not really seeing it as a significant move. But I think that big tech, PSD2, and a framework where people are not scaremongered away from sharing their data in this environment could be the magic formula to change the industry.
Right. Ranil, what do you think?
Look, I think
were you doing some scaremongering there with your worry about security? You shouldn't share with too many providers because your data might get lost?
You never know, right? So personal view is, I think it's an opportunity for banks.
Yeah.
I think it's an opportunity for maybe bigger platform players. Like, I think if Amazon decided to get into banking, they would be a massive beneficiary of PSD2. Is it going to help a lot of the smaller fintechs? Probably, like my view is maybe not, right? So I think that there is that kind of that trust issue, right? Which I think, I've seen, a bunch of research which says, consumers still have a wait and see approach to understanding how that's going to really play out. So more of an opportunity than a threat.
Right, absolutely. Great. I think that's probably all the time we have for questions. I think the audience has questions. They're going to be moving the speakers to a separate space where you can talk to them and ask your questions. But thank you all for listening. And thanks to our panelists, Ranil and Anne. You've been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.